Hey there, friends. Hey there, friends. Hey there, patrons. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, YouTube channel member squishers who keep this channel going and allow me to do cool commissions like the High Tower of Old Town here, where many plots and schemes emerge. And like the Winterfell Crypts that you'll be seeing on a couple of videos very soon. And we got a very special stream for you today. Something many of you have been asking for a while, honestly. And I just keep saying no, like a party pooper. But you guys have wanted to ask about what if questions, decision points, roads not taken, moments in the story when things could have gone one way but went to other instead. And so I have taken a bunch of those from you guys in the Discord, and I've got some from my guest. And so we're gonna have a good old time speculating about what could have been here atop the High Tower in Plankytown Studios. 3, 2, 1. Oh, we're gonna crash into the window, and oh man, every time it breaks. So I'd like to, guys, introduce my guest, very special guest, Cameron Casky from the Bulwark and the FY Pod. You guys, a lot of you guys will know him. He's been on the channel a couple times. And yeah, this is a little break for you from talking about the real world. We're here to talk about the pretend world. Are you ready?
Yeah, I suppose it is pretend. Although occasionally for me, it's a little too real. I'm glad you said roads not taken, because I think there are too many Feast for Crows haters in the fandom, and they deserve to be uncomfortable. They shouldn't be allowed. All right, Feast for Crows is just a knockout. And frankly, the roads not taken line, the thing that Jaime remembers Rhaegar saying, probably one of the most important lines thematically in the entire series.
Yeah, that's sort of George hanging a lampshade on it. This idea of like, sometimes when I write a story, what I do is I think about what might happen, and then I go, but what if that didn't happen? And that's kind of how life is. And I've pointed this out many times as a great writing technique of George's that does create that realistic feel. Everyone's got their plans and they can't all work, Cameron. So somebody's plans have to be disappointed.
I mean, I also think that some of the best stuff in the series is when POV characters are like thinking back about the choices that they made. I mean, John Connington just, wishing he was Tywin Lannister, wishing he had burned down Stony Sept is so good. It's so good.
Yeah, I talked about that one a lot in a few recent videos. I did a John Con Plague video, and I talked about the Blackfire Rebellion. There's a very similar speech from Sir Eustace when he's talking about the Blackfire Rebellion. It's like, oh, if Quickfinger had been caught with the dragon's egg and this and that, we'd be in King's Landing and blah, blah, blah. And it's going to be a little bit similar on House of the Dragon here, too. I know you're not super about House of the Dragon, but there's going to be a bunch of battles, Cameron. Don't give up on the show yet. It's going to be fun.
Well, I like it. I like it. Like, the worst Ice and Fire stuff to me is better than the best of pretty much anything else. But, when it comes to stuff I wanted to talk about, I was like, you know what? You guys are going to have so many weeks coming up to talk about House of the Dragon. There was a green man scene on set. Like, I'm going to let that be your thing. I want to get into some speculation.
Well, that is, like I said, I've been starving my audience. They've been begging me, and I'm just like, no, like a grumpy old man that I am. And so here we are to not do that. We're here to make everyone's dreams a reality. And I do want to shout out my Discord. I was barely finished typing the sentence, hey, we're going to do what if questions. And it was like, they came pouring in. So we've got lots of stuff to talk about. We've got a few from you. And if you guys in the chat want to try to get in on this too, you can. We're going to go through a lot of these. So Cameron, what I was thinking is basically some of these we can do quick, and I'll let you sort of, take the lead or whatever. But anything that we want to hash out for a few more minutes, we can. So it's not necessarily we're going to give equal discussion time to every question. Some of these are just fun. Some of them have a quick answer. Some of them may generate a little more. So thank you everyone that sent in a question. If we go through yours quick, please don't be offended. We have a lot, and I can't do like 15 minutes on every question. But we'll just, like I said, I try to defer to my guests on this new show format here. You're the king. Have it your way. Burger King slogans insert here. So we'll start with yours. And like I said, guys in the live chat, if you want to super chat and get one in, preferably what would make it easier for me is if you have a question that's related to one we're talking about or about to come up on, and then you can put your angle on it. But we'll try to get them all. Cameron does have to leave in about an hour and 45 minutes, so we'll see. We'll see how we get through these. But so the first one you threw out, Cam, was what if the Renly shadow baby had not worked? Meaning, what if Renly was not killed?
Well, it kind of means two things. It means what if Renly was not killed, and what if Stannis lost faith in Melisandre? Because if the shadow baby prank hadn't worked, probably would have caused Stannis to have sort of a crisis of doubt. And mind you, he has those about Melisandre a couple times. So there's a chance she would have just said some bullshit about how, oh, she misread the flames, but now the flames are telling you to do this. And Stannis would have been like, all right, fair enough. But it's pretty much undeniable by any measure that had Renly not been killed by the shadow baby, he would have taken King's Landing pretty much immediately. The question would be, how long could he have held it? And what would Varys have done in that case to poise either a Blackfyre restoration or a Targaryen restoration? Because, Renly would have been able to hold King's Landing, in my opinion, with a little bit more strength than Robert.
Oh, absolutely.
Renly's politics, I think, get a little bit of a hard time in the story. I think Renly plays his cards a little bit more adroitly than some of the other characters say that he does.
Certainly. We're kind of Renly fans around here. There's definitely a bunch of them, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like, Renly would have taken King's Landing, but Varys still would have been scheming for Aegon and Daenerys to come take Westeros. And I just don't know if Renly would have been able to out-scheme Varys in that sense. So what's undeniable is that the War of the Five Kings ends right there. Robb would have stood no shot.
No.
The Lannisters would have stood no shot. Renly was so overpowered. Renly just had a million guys.
Robb would have no reason to continue his war, and Renly would no doubt be apt to throw the Starks a few Lannisters, as offerings. That easily could have been worked out. So that is the end of the War of the Five Kings. Absolutely. They just really have to deal with Balon Greyjoy, which is not that big a deal, honestly.
And I don't know how much of a shit Renly would have even really given, because
they're raiding Lannisters. True. He's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, and if Robb wanted any support against Balon, Renly would have been like, oh yeah, I'll send some of my million guys to go drive Balon out of the north for you if you bend the knee. And then you can almost have sort of a remake of Balon's Rebellion, where the Baratheon is Renly and the Stark is Robb. The only difference is Robb would be fighting and Renly would probably just be hanging out.
That would be cool, honestly. That'd be a good scene. The victory tent afterwards. Renly is in his finery, and Robb's all bloody, and Loras would be all bloody and dirty too, because we know how Loras gets down. He led the charge on Dragonstone, apparently burned with hot oil. Maybe we'll see. So when we think about King Renly, first of all, I think he would have been a very good king. He knows exactly what the people want, which is fakery and shows and politics, and he's good at that. With the whole Marjorie Loras arrangement, that totally would have worked. Marjorie as the public queen, and then Loras as the secret, Renly's fire, his flame or whatever, that would have worked.
Yeah, and I think one of the great additions in the show is that Marjorie just wouldn't have given a shit. Marjorie would have been like, yeah, you fuck Loras, great. Somebody just said Brienne would be Hand of the King. That is so not true. Brienne would be Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and right. Mace Tyrell would be Hand of the King, and that would be probably the worst part of the Renly administration, is that Renly and Mace, neither of them have that Jon Arryn or Tyrion Tywin ability to run the operation. So I think Renly might have gotten a little sick of Mace pretty quickly, because Mace is kind of a loser.
Yeah, I think you put Mace in charge as Hand as part of the deal, and then find a way to force him out a year down the road. Renly would be the more powerful political figure in that relationship anyway. He kind of knows what's up. Varys would have had to assassinate him. It wouldn't have been possible, I don't think, to just undermine and isolate Renly to where he started ruling the kingdom poorly, in the way that Cersei is doing. Because with Cersei, it's easy. Just let her do her thing. Let Cersei cook, and everyone will be ready for Rhaegar, which is what's happening. Yeah. But with Renly, he would have had to straight kill him and create a crazy power vacuum, something like that.
Yeah, that's correct. And if he just poisoned Renly, the administration would not be very strong from there because Mace would presumably be the hand in that case. And Mace is just not able to keep an operation tight, and it would be a little bit of a mess. So in the situation
Mace's
where
mom told us about him, everything we need to know.
yeah. Now in the situation where I could see Baelish being hand. I think if anybody could figure out how to make that happen, it would be Baelish, and it would not be hard. I think if Baelish just got a couple minutes alone with Renly, for him to be like, "All right, Renly, I understand why you made Mace the hand. He gave you this army. This army gave you the crown. That's great, and I hold space for that truth. But let's be adults here. There are going to be some wars to come. There are going to be some threats, perhaps from the east. You need a grown-up doing this. I mean, mind you, I'm pretty sure Littlefinger's like 28 in the book. But
well, that might be the easiest way to keep an eye on Littlefinger. You kind of either have to execute him or like have him working right next to you so you can keep an eye on him. And if you can't trust somebody like that, so maybe you can make use of him for a little while. It is worth pointing out, like, Littlefinger went to the Tyrells and struck this whole deal with the Joffrey wedding and murder. Like, they set all that up before any of them ever came to King's Landing. So yeah, it's actually not crazy to say that. So there was a super chat, which, if Robb swapped Cat and Theon's assignments to treat with Renly and Balon. Let's see.
Well, I mean, here's the thing is people in the South would have been like, oh, here's a fucking backwards inbred Iron Islander. Like, they would have taken it as a huge showing of disrespect that they sent slimy ass Theon Greyjoy down there.
And the Ironborn aren't going to listen to a female envoy, I hate to say. They're a little sexist, just a little.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of Balon thinking that Theon is such a pussy that he would rather have Asha be his heir. Yeah, they're pretty outrageously sexist. But yeah, I mean, the Southerners were already like, why is Cat coming here, not Robb? The Southerners see Northerners as a little backwards, and the Northerners see the Iron Men as pretty backwards. So I can't imagine the Southerners would be like, I mean, they would think they had sent a fucking animal.
Yeah, Catelyn did a great job of treating with Renly. Like, she made all the points. The problem was that Renly was bent on his course of action, and Stannis was just, neither one of them. I mean, that's the whole thing. Stubborn Baratheons. Like, nobody was going to make that work. So
somebody said, why would the Faith of the Seven be okay with a deviant gay king? I think that because Renly would be married to a woman, they would just rather have a king who they can use. And I think Renly would be pretty easy for the Faith to manipulate. And, they were okay with Targaryen incest once they rolled out the Targaryen exceptionalism doctrine.
Yeah, and they were mad about that because it was visible. Like, discreet buggery. It's not really a thing. And the other thing about it is, like, the Faith is supposed to be an analog to the Catholic Church. So we can assume that some of these septons prefer the company of other septons and young altar boys and things, and they're probably pretty used to keeping a lid on that. So again, it's all about the public messaging and the politics of what's going on. So yeah, I think the whole Renly, Loras, Marjorie triumvirate, if you will, would have been fine. It's pretty typical for what we see from real medieval history. So yeah.
Okay, what if Bran never climbed the tower and never caught Cersei and Jaime? That's a really big one.
So that's one of those we don't have a story ones. And a lot of these are that kind of thing. Like, you can see where Martin creates a normal path that everyone was on, and then by deviating from it, we have a story. Jaime and Cersei. So Stannis already had figured out. Obviously, Varys had figured it out. So people knew about it, and it could have still been used to undermine Robert's rule, but it wouldn't have been anything like that scheme. It was a combination of Bran seeing Jaime and Cersei, and also the letter from Lysa Littlefinger that threw the Starks onto suspecting the Lannisters. But I think it was Bran falling from the tower that, like, added a lot of emotion and momentum to that, because now it's like, oh, the Lannisters tried to kill our son, so
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like what we learn in the beginning of a Game of Thrones, and the reason that what was supposed to be a trilogy is now 5 books to get maybe 2/3 of the way through the story, is that everything in Westeros was a powder keg. Like they were not on a steady track before that happened. If anything, John Aaron dying was a much bigger catalyst for the story than Bran getting pushed. Bran getting pushed put what was already happening on fast forward.
Yeah,
Um,
John Aaron dying is the thing that set everything in motion, absolutely. And of course, he was killed by Littlefinger. So Littlefinger has really been setting this thing in motion from the beginning. That was the whole thing. Is like he kills John Aaron and then sends the letter to the Starks to frame the Lannisters as they're showing up there. So,
so yeah, what I'm saying is all these, pretty much every major movement of at least the beginning of the War of the Five Kings was already in place. This simply sped it all up because Ned was already going down to King's Landing to investigate. Um, Enough people already knew about the incest, and Robert's reign was immediately just in a precarious position. And Varys was still preparing for an invasion, whether that's from Aegon the Sixth, who I don't call Fagon out of respect, whether that's from Aegon the Sixth or Daenerys or both. So
I'm gonna go ahead and keep calling him Fagon. You can do what you want. But
and also, and by the way, just speaking of what our next one's going to be, the Dornish are still plotting for revenge. Like, all of these major issues are. Balon still would have invaded the North at one point or another. Like, you could say he's just an opportunist and was, exploiting the War of the Five Kings beginning. But again, I just don't really understand how Ned would not have still ended up getting executed, because he was still going to find out about the incest. He was still going to tell Cersei first. And everybody was still plotting against Robert.
So yeah, Robert's misrule is the first thing. Like if he had been more on the ball, not letting Littlefinger do all this embezzlement and basically just being an absentee king. And coupled with that is Ned going to the north and not maintaining any contacts in King's Landing, not participating in the governance of the realm that he helped Robert and John Aaron overthrow. Ned had a lot of PTSD, understandably, but he basically went north and he turtled up. He did not, like I said, did not maintain sources at King's Landing to find out what's going on. So when he got there, everything was a surprise, and he's basically the last person to know everything. So that failure between Ned and Robert, and I guess John Aaron, to rule the kingdom that they toppled is where it all starts. And then, yes, you have Varys planning on bringing back a secret candidate. And yeah, is Fagon? No, it's not a homophobic slur. Fagon is fake Aegon. I've never heard anyone pronounce it anything other than Fagon to give anyone that idea. So no, that is not what that is. Nor would that be okay. Like, we wouldn't be repeating it if that's what it was. Come on, Matt.
But yeah, but basically, I guess the point of this what if is like, I don't want people to have the misunderstanding that the War of the Five Kings happened and everything went to shit because Bran got pushed out of the tower. Bran getting pushed out of the tower just sped everything up. All of the major messes that were going to be started, the revenge plot from Dorne, which is serious, would have still been at play. The Targaryen restoration movement would have still been at play. Littlefinger would have still been Littlefinger. Everything was going to shit. And like you said, that was the result of a lack of cohesion from Ned, Robert, and John. If Ned, Robert, and John had been a cohesive unit, it would have taken a lot more maneuvering from Varys and Illyrio to make something very bad happen.
Yeah, George is skillful. He doesn't just take one thing and like, oh, that's why everything happened. Like, no, like any real world event, it's like, what started this war? Well, it was this and that and this and all at the same time, and then this one guy did that, and it's a mix of things. So what if Oberyn had won the trial by combat? Well, all of us would be a little bit less scarred, first of all, and let's think about. Do you have something ready for this while I chew on that?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Tyrion was fucked. The second Joffrey died...
If I could ask you to not use the profanity, that we can keep the stream monetized that way, that'd be good.
My bad. Tyrion was in a lot of trouble. I mean, I don't think Tyrion really had a chance as soon as Joffrey was killed. Maybe he would have been able to maneuver his way out of, getting the death penalty from his trial. Somebody was going to kill him. Tyrion had made too many powerful enemies when he was the hand dealing out his justice. He had no shot. He had isolated anybody who could have potentially been in his corner. And so, like, we could say...
The other thing is that it's way too convenient for Tywin if Tyrion dies somehow in a way that he can get mad about and demand justice for, but, like, Tyrion's out of the way. Like, that's basically ideal. Tywin might have been one of the people plotting to kill Tyrion. He tried to at the Red Fork, essentially, by putting him on front lines, and then, yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they could have just poisoned him. As soon as Joffrey had been killed, if they had poisoned Tyrion, they could have just been like, even though Tyrion was proven innocent, somebody who's a Joffrey loyalist around the castle wanted revenge on him. Gee, who could it have been? We don't know. No one was going to mourn Tyrion. Like, if Tyrion had been killed, there wasn't going to be a justice for Tyrion movement. Even after what he did at the Blackwater, he inspired no loyalty.
Yeah, he just did the right thing. A little bit like Jon Snow, actually. He's like, I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm not going to bother to sell my decisions to anyone. I'm just going to tell them tough shit.
Well, I mean, to be fair, there's a big difference, which was Jon Snow was doing the right thing because he wanted to do the right thing. He did want power. He did dream of being that kind of Stark heir.
No, Jon has a moral compass that Tyrion lacks, certainly.
Tyrion was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Tyrion enjoyed that he was able to dispense that justice. He wasn't thinking as much about the justice as he was thinking about his own sort of power.
I would say that he was trying to rule skillfully, and he had a good understanding of the perception of justice and how that worked. So he did some dishonorable stuff, but like chopping the singer up and putting him in a stew because he knew about him and Shay. That's obviously not right or honorable. But like he knew to keep that a secret, and then he has the appearance of doing justice at times, so. And
that's the beautiful thing about the Tyrion-Cersei relationship being the bad one of the Lannister siblings is Tyrion and Cersei arguably have more in common than either of them do with Jaime, because Tyrion and Cersei are both just trying to be Tywin.
Yeah, Tyrion and Jaime have the same sense of humor and little else in common. That's what they have. It's the same sarcastic, like, biting snark. And I think George basically writes the jokes from the same headspace, and they are the funniest characters, really, in the story. But you're right. Well, Cersei and Tyrion act more.
They both see themselves as Tywin's real heir. Tywin sees Jaime as his heir.
And Jaime couldn't give a F, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Cersei's like, no, I'm actually young Tywin. Tyrion's like, well, I'm Tyrion writ small. And there you have it.
Yeah. What if David Lightbringer had no Song of Ice and Fire content to work with because the novels were never written? Why would you say that, Sarah? Well, I don't know. I don't know what I've
been doing real time.
I mean, I was working at Guitar Center, Well, then I was growing vegetables in California. Then I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know if I would have ever gotten to YouTube and ended up being so steeped in mythology and symbolism as I have been able to make myself by studying these books for 10 years. So I really feel like I feel very blessed, just to break the fourth wall, to be able to have spent so much time thinking about mythology and symbolism and researching that stuff, storytelling and all that, and make a living at the same time. So that's why I always thank you guys. Like, I am incredibly grateful. I have massive ADHD. I do not want to have a regular job. I'd much rather do this. So thank you guys. But to get back to this, what if Tyrion had thrown Littlefinger in jail when he arrived in King's Landing in A Clash of Kings, empowered his hand? Littlefinger wouldn't have been able to scheme with the Tyrells, is the first thing I think of. What else?
I mean, that's 1,000,000% the biggest mistake Tyrion ever makes. Because Tyrion had a great reason to throw Littlefinger in jail, which was Tyrion knew Littlefinger planted the dagger. So Tyrion, as Hand of the King, could have absolutely been like, I'm throwing Baelish in jail. And who would have cried about it? Like I said about Tyrion, there would not have been a justice for Littlefinger movement, except for a bunch of like irrelevant houses in the Vale who Littlefinger had given a bunch of
The
loans
rebellion
to.
of the fingers. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
It'd be called the
yeah, okay,
Sheets Rebellion.
a bunch of conveniently placed Vale houses that had only appeared in appendices until Feast for Crows would have probably been a little upset about that. But they would have been okay. All right. The Vale uprising would not have done much. But if Tyrion had thrown Littlefinger in jail, he would have had a much better shot holding on to power. The only thing is, then Renly would have taken King's Landing. Would Renly have executed Tyrion? Like, I guess. I don't know. I do we know much about Renly and Tyrion's relationship?
I mean, Renly is no, I don't think we do. I don't think we do.
They never really speak about each other or think about each other. And you know, I don't see why they would have a bad relationship. They don't really conflict with either of each other's interests. You know, Tyrion very nakedly hated Cersei, and Renly obviously hated Cersei. So I'm sure they could have had that to bond over. But it is sort of like one of the questions of Ice and Fire
So
that
Joffrey wouldn't have been assassinated. You know, if the Tyrells had wanted to come to and make this deal with the Lannisters, they would have had to figure out a different way to assassinate Joffrey. Littlefinger basically sewed that up and presented it to them, as it seems to me. And most of the trouble that Littlefinger caused was before the story, like we just started. Really what he does at this point is he makes this deal with the Tyrells, and then he steals Sansa and buggers off to the Vale. Like, so that never would have happened. Sansa wouldn't have been taken. She would still be a prisoner. Basically, the Lannisters would have more power, and they'd be in King's Landing kind of doing their thing more unopposed, I think is the answer. Let me grab a couple things from the chat real quick. First of all, Cameron, I was just accused of being a communist who doesn't want to have a job. News at 11. I mean, that's kind of funny. I'm actually not mad about that. But I will just say, I work really damn hard on this channel. I work every day, almost all day. I hardly ever tear myself away from my projects. So, and I work really hard on it because I don't want to have a quote unquote regular job where I have a boss and a structure and a schedule. That's what I don't want. It's not that I don't want to work hard. I actually work so hard that I have to really struggle to force myself to do recreation, to be honest. But that's cool. You can keep LARPing for capitalism if you want. That's fine. We're not, Cameron. We're not. You made me promise we're not going to talk about politics. So
well, I mean, to be fair, I said we're not going to talk about current event politics. This is more political. This is more political theory. So
yeah.
But you know, I think we wrapped that one up pretty nicely.
We can if we could talk about capitalist wage slavery a little bit. We could just dip our. No, we've got lots of these to get through. So we have been told that the Targaryen dragons. And by the way, I employ people. I'm a job creator. So hold your fire there. Hold your fire. We have been told that the Targaryen dragons are bred for war. What if Targaryen madness comes from them being bred for war? So that's not a what if question. That's a theory question. I will just say the madness definitely comes from having lizard DNA and inbreeding, some combination of that. But I don't know about the Targaryen dragons being bred for war having anything to do with it. It's just the fact that they're lizard people. And that's a little dicey, I would imagine.
And not to get too philosophical here, but if you really think about it, especially in the Dark Ages, aren't all men bred for war?
Yes, and that's the whole point of the broken man speech in A Feast for Crows, and also all of A Feast for Crows. Super chat from Sierran McGee Music. What if Stannis claimed the third dragon? He does have Targaryen blood after all. And, you know, he's got that Azor Ahai. I don't know if he really has Azor Ahai symbolism so much as Melisandre's trying to force it on him, but he burns Shireen, activates the horn. He uses his 1/3 Targ blood to claim a dragon. How's this my fault? No, I mean, Stannis' whole role is to be a pretender Azor Ahai. So I don't know. How would he have used the dragon? If Melisandre had woken a dragon for him, how would we use the dragon? He would have tried to use it like Aegon the Conqueror, to take the Iron Throne and rule the Seven Kingdoms. Now, he might have been, like Aegon, someone who would then think, okay, I'm going to secure the kingdom so I can fight the White Walkers with my dragon. He does seem to be dedicated to fighting the others and taking them seriously as a threat. So I think he would have used his dragon that way. Stannis is well-meaning. he's just like really bitter and has no. Well, he does have a dry humor, actually. I take that back. He's kind of funny.
Can I be a little bit of a party pooper?
Sure.
All right, I'm going to bring some realism. I'm going to bring us down to earth. As a matter of fact, maybe in one of the ways that's really holding up George. But a couple things. Number one, um, I don't think, I honestly, I hate to say it. I think, and you guys can crucify me in the comments for this all you want. I don't think you need Targaryen blood to ride a dragon. I think that's propaganda. I think Nettles was able to ride a dragon. I don't think she has Targaryen blood. I think that it might help strengthen the psychological or spiritual link with the dragon. But I have a feeling somebody could probably just ride a dragon. That's my personal opinion. The next thing I was going to say is I don't really
just want to say
see.
I strongly disagree with that, but I've said my reasons before, so go ahead.
I don't necessarily know how Stannis getting a dragon would work with timing. The stone dragon to me feels so much like it's about grayscale because there's just throughout history. I mean, unless I'm mistaken, even in the World of Ice and Fire stuff, there's really no talk of there being stone dragons. Yeah, and like if
No,
we're talking
only
about a
waking
dragon,
dragons from stone. Yeah, you're totally right. The stone dragon is Shireen, and it would be kind of ironic for George to be like, "Oh, these people they really want to wake the stone dragon," and then at the end, Shireen's going to get burned, and her grayscale is going to be like in the air and contaminating people or something like that. Yeah,
and it's also like a dragon made out of is like a giant gargoyle. You know, like the other thing that could be dragons from stone is just that's what the dragon eggs looked like to Daenerys rocks.
yeah.
But the last thing is like, you know, I don't really think the dragons are going to practically play as big a role against the others as perhaps Daenerys herself will, simply because by the end of A Dance with Dragons, like the dragons aren't very big. Like
They're not.
to me,
No, they're not.
dragons are more symbolic of her being the conqueror reborn. She has presumably an army of Dothraki. She has an army of Unsullied. She's this big unifying force, and the dragons are very much the figurehead for that force. And I could see a dragon maybe burning up a couple others and everything, but it's not going to be like the show where she's just massacring giant hordes with the dragons. It's just not safe.
They were taking some dragon steroids on Game of Thrones.
Can I tell you something? I do think
Some
one
dragon
of the
growth
things,
hormone.
it's funny you say that. I think one of the reasons, and this is just kind of tinfoil a little bit, but also I think it's reasonable to think. I do believe, yes, there was the 5-year gap, and that was always planned, but maybe one of the things George was planting a seed for with talking about going to Asshai by the Shadow would have been some sort of magic ritual happening with the Shadowbinders from Asshai that grew the dragons to be bigger at a faster rate. That's kind of one of the things that's always bopped around in the back of my head is maybe
Is there
one
a
of the reasons.
is there a dragon growth hormone? Is there a Balco Labs in Asshai?
You know what
Get
I'm
those
saying
home
though?
run
Like,
numbers up. Come on, Barry.
George was so excited about going to Asshai. Jorah Mormont wouldn't shut the heck up about it.
Almost as excited about Asshai as me.
He was almost as excited about Asshai as he was about Dany. But and you know the first couple months of Linus Hightower. But I do think that Daenerys' dragons are more about the unifying force she represents for this Targaryen race than like, you know, how much damage they can actually do. Because I mean, the size of Drogon, who's the biggest one right now, a scorpion could probably mess him up pretty good.
Well, it's basically like Luke's dragon from House of the Dragon season 1. You know, Lucerys.
Yeah.
Again, you know, not Vhagar size.
Like a giant horse.
Yeah. So I think you're onto it here. I think, yeah, grayscale was leaked from a lab. Can't prove it wasn't. Came from UT. No, stop. That's racist. I think they'll be flying to the Heart of Winter, Dany and Jon, potentially, with like Bran's guidance. I totally think it's a Lord of the Rings thing where, remember how there's all the armies fighting at the gate, the Black Gate of Mordor, and then Sam and Frodo are going in deep cover behind enemy lines to do the magical task of destroying the ring. George is definitely going to do that. Like Bran,
that is, in my opinion, the best Heart of Winter is real argument. I think that is. Yeah. I don't know if I'm a Heart of Winter is real person, but if I am, that's the argument.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And there's the whole weirwood net thing, like whatever's messed up with the weirwood net, there's got to be some way to cleanse it or something like that. So I think all that's going down at the heart of winter. And so the dragons will fly them there, and there may be like a magical burning at some point. But yeah, I don't think it's just going to be like roasting fields of whites. The whites are going to just screw everybody. They're going to mess everybody up, and it's going to be hard to deal with. Okay, so going on to our many Discord questions. What if Ned, and I might not read everybody's name, but they'll be up on the screen, so thank you guys. What if Ned had thrown in with Renly? This is definitely something Ned could have done. Like, he was right there. It just, Ned couldn't because it wasn't like by the book and letter of the law,
Yeah, it's funny. Ned is a lot more like what people say Stannis is than Stannis is. Like everybody talks about how
You're not wrong about that.
Like Stannis is very regularly making concessions. He isn't executing Theon because he recognizes there could be some use for Theon. He's going up to the wall. He's working with the mountain clans. Like Stannis bends a lot. Stannis is constantly restructuring his way of doing things. Ned is that rigid guy who will only follow things by the book. So he wouldn't do that to Stannis, but if he did go in with Renly, I think it would have been pretty much the same circumstance as what we talked about with if Renly had survived, except Ned probably would have been hand, and then that would have been real trouble for Varys and the Targaryen restoration or the Blackfire restoration.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about this. So what Renly is saying is basically, let's out Robert's kids as Lannister bastards, and then I'm going to claim the throne. And Ned's objection was basically, did he bring up Stannis and the fact that Renly wasn't first, or was it all about, I'm not going to go arresting children in the middle of the night or whatever?
I don't remember, but it doesn't matter. Ned would not have messed with the line of succession like that. If there wasn't a reasonable explanation for why Renly should get the role instead of Stannis.
Yes, Ned did bring up Stannis, the chat says, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the point at which Renly's stubbornness comes into play, because that Renly could have made this happen by basically agreeing that, okay, yes, we'll put Stannis in power, but he didn't, he just, it's like, Stannis wouldn't be a fun king. Come on, guys. I mean, look at me. I'm Renly.
Stannis as king would be a mess. I mean, he would be a mess.
Yeah, it would not have brought much joy to anyone. He's not really super great, super well cut out to be a king. And that's kind of the thing that George did with the family here. Is like, Renly honestly is the best candidate for king in the family. It's not Robert, but he was the youngest, and so it wasn't gonna fall to him. And that's, George loves to do that kind of messed up stuff. So
yeah.
What if Ned told Robert about how Lyanna felt and he changed? You mean changed in what sense? Like, that was the whole point of the interaction, is that Lyanna says somebody's not going to change their true nature. Robert is what he is. Lyanna doesn't even sound like she hates Robert in that scene so much as she just sounds like she's like, yeah, no, he's kind of a drunken philanderer. He's a good guy. I know he's your friend and everything, Ned, but true love, love can't change a man's nature. That's the line.
The truth is, no matter what Ned told Robert about Lyanna, all he could have stood have done was isolate Robert from him, because Robert, no matter how he feels about Ned, is not going to allow Ned to change the narrative he has in his head about the Lyanna situation. Robert is locked into the Lyanna situation, and I don't think there's anything that could have changed Robert's mind, because Robert's entire psyche is built off of that personal grievance. I mean, I dream of killing Rhaegar every night. That's who Robert is. That's who Robert is. So I don't think that would have changed.
A typical example of somebody who's created, a dream version, an imaginary version of somebody, an idealized version. Like, he barely even knew Lyanna, but he's...
And by the way, who among us hasn't done that once or twice? It's very human. We all project everything we wanted in life onto other people and then realize, wait a second, it isn't that simple.
Cameron, I mean, we all did it with Obama, and he told us we were doing it as we did it. So
I can't do current politics.
That's been a minute. It's not really current anymore. But no, we have all done it. I'm just proud to be old enough now to where I've learned that lesson finally.
Yeah. Robert did not get to learn it, and he would never have learned it. What if Rhaegar defeated Robert at the Trident?
The blessed reign. Long may he reign, Prince Rhaegar, the magnificent. No. What do you think?
What would have happened? Well, you still have Varys, and you still have Blackfire Restoration, and Daenerys. The Daenerys factor would have changed, but I think the biggest thing to take into consideration is how the Blackfire cause, or how the Aegon the Sixth Targaryen cause would have moved. Because if Aegon, let's say Aegon the Sixth is a Blackfire, which I don't necessarily think is true. Let's say he's a Blackfire.
It's definitely true.
Hear me out. Let's say he's a Blackfire.
It's fine. No, I'm just teasing you.
Varys is still going to be pulling strings. Varys is still going to be pulling strings. The whole plot would change, though, because, like, who will be the Blackfire that they prop up? It would have been a completely different situation. But at the end of the day, I think Rhaegar would have been very forgiving with his enemies. I think Rhaegar would have done what Aegon the Conqueror did, which is tell his enemies to lay their swords down at his feet and then forgive them, let them walk home with their tail between their legs.
There was a lot of support for Rhaegar. I think what we're skipping over here is the fact that Rhaegar wins at the Trident. He still has to go back to King's Landing and deal with his crazy-ass father. He's got to find a way to depose him. Go ahead.
I think that he would just march on King's Landing immediately and just get rid of Aerys. Like, I don't think there would have been any daylight between those two things. I think the second...
Aerys still tries to blow up King's Landing, though. It's like, no.
I don't know. All I know is that, like, the only reason Rhaegar was fighting on Aerys' side was because he's a Targaryen. As we know, Rhaegar was already making moves to depose and replace Aerys. That was already going to happen.
Correct. Yeah.
And then there's
but
a
that
chance...
was before the war. That was before running off with Lyanna and the war and everything. So, like, whatever Rhaegar was going to do to depose him, I think, Tywin was already in favor of doing this. And so I think you probably...
Rhaegar could have just treated with Tywin. He could have just treated with Tywin and said to Tywin, all right, let's go kick my freaking dad out. And that would have been that.
And then he's still got to make up with the Starks because Lyanna's still dead. And
then maybe you get a Northern Rebellion in that case. But even then, it would have been really hard to do.
Well, Jon probably wouldn't be secret at that point. Rhaegar would probably bring him out and be like, oh, no, this is Lyanna's child, and use that to help repair that Stark alliance, perhaps.
He could say that's going to be his heir. And that would have caused even more problems with the Dornish. That's another thing to factor in, is the Dornish were not.
Yeah, I don't think he would have named Jon the heir, because we see Rhaegar talking about Aegon, his son, as the prince that was promised, and there just needed to be one more head of the dragon. And that was his thinking, I think, with, making a baby with Lyanna, if you will, because obviously Elia couldn't have another one. So I think baby Aegon, who's alive in this scenario, because he's not killed and Elia's not killed until after the Trident and all that stuff. So that never happens. Elia's still alive. Lyanna's not.
Yeah, and then Elia just becomes a hostage, because if she doesn't become a hostage, there's going to be a Dornish rebellion. Plain and simple. I mean, Rhaegar massively offended the Dornish.
No, he didn't.
By running away with Lyanna?
We are never told there. We never hear a single whisper of any Dornish being upset about that. And what's his name? Doran Martell is trying to marry his children to Targaryens still, to Viserys and Dany. So he's clearly not.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. There's no way they would have been like, oh, it's okay. You cheated on Elia with the Stark. With the Stark.
I think if Elia is still the queen and her kids are still the heirs, then there's not like a huge problem.
I suppose. Although you can never underestimate the Dornish ability to be petty about something.
Oberyn certainly. I feel like Doran is pretty pragmatic, But let's go on from King Rhaegar. It's, alas, not meant to be. That's definitely a road not taken, though, just to put a spotlight on the writing technique. Rhaegar is very Prince Charming coded, and Robert is kind of like a swaggering frat boy, a jock, if you will. And it's like, what if Prince Charming died 20 years ago instead of becoming king. You know, that's kind of one of the big what ifs that he started with. So what if Arya used her free assassinations from Jaqen to kill the Lannisters? I think this is another one where it just ends the story too soon. Like if she kills Tywin, you know, Tyrion is that's before Tywin goes back to King's Landing. So that means that Tyrion has longer to be Hand of the King.
Where is Tywin camped out at that point? I don't really remember Clash.
Well, he came through Harrenhal after making the deal with Roose Bolton.
And right, okay. Well, I mean, yeah, the story would have ended, but the question would be, what would the reconciliation after that have been? Because, you know, the question is, okay, the Lannisters are dead. Which Lannisters? Because you only get a couple.
Tywin is the one who was in Harrenhal, and that's what Arya thinks. Oh, I should have said Lord Tywin because he had already left by the time she thought of that.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, would killing Lord Tywin in that situation have made the Lannister Baratheon cause completely fall apart? Because the Northerners still have a war to win, and I don't think that changes Robb betraying Walder Frey. So yes, Tywin was the original mind behind the Red Wedding, but you know, I don't know.
The Freys can't carry it out without that protection and promise from the Lannisters. But I can't. Would he have made? I think he would have already made this deal by then. I can't recall exactly. I want to move on to some other ones. I don't want to spend too long on that one. That's kind of a one that's like it kills the story. You know, like a lot of things just don't happen. What if Jaehaerys had chosen Rhaenys as heir? Well, Rhaenys, I shined up the memory of Rhaenys a bit, and then I went back and did the Rhaenys stream. I did like a 5-hour stream on Rhaenys, the writer of Dreamfire, and she's kind of reckless, honestly. She would not have been a good ruler of Westeros, let's say, really. Like, in retrospect, she really wouldn't have been. I would love the character, but she didn't really want it. Yeah. She didn't want anything to do with it, you know? Like, she wanted to have the grudge. She wanted to play up the disrespect or whatever, but I don't think she really wanted to rule the kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been a disaster, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, kind of.
That would have just been a mess because you already have the sexism that's rampant in this society.
Oh, I'm thinking of the wrong Rhaenys. Not right, Rhaenys right of Dreamfire. Jaehaerys choosing the heir. That would have been, sorry, the queen who never was, is they're talking about.
I mean, you're still going to have a big problem with the sexism of it all. I think, but the difference is, I don't know if Viserys would have tried to start a rebellion after that. You know, I don't think that would have necessarily started.
No, I think Rhaenys, the queen who never was, is the one who could have actually been a female ruler and like got everybody normalized to it. Because remember, she's married to Corlys Velaryon, who is powerful, rich, and well-liked and good at politics at that point. So like they would have been an incredible power couple. And you're right, Viserys is not the type of person to cause a ruckus about that. Daemon maybe, but like
yeah. Daemon would have been a problem because Daemon would have used the sexism thing, you know.
But Rhaenys and Corlys are so much more powerful. Like Daemon is like 19 when Viserys is chosen at the Great Council.
Yeah, but Daemon is also a favorite of George. So if anybody could pull something off, that's a little outrageous. It is our rogue prince. But no, I mean, there would have been a lot more stability under Rhaenys. I think there probably would have been some scheming against her, but I think it would have been a lot harder to depose her than it would have. Rhaenyra.
She's presented as a wise ruler, the queen who never was. The whole point of it is that she would have been a good ruler. She has all the traits. She has all the connections.
Like Baelor Breakspear, all the good rulers are the ones who never get the chance. Yeah,
that's why I've been calling Baelor the king who never was. They're very similar archetypes there. What if Ned said no and didn't go south?
Ned said no, didn't go south.
basically the Lannisters and Littlefinger and Varys would just continue to eat Robert alive. He would have been killed, and the Joffrey would have become king, and the Lannisters would have been a Lannister. That's just what happened, more or less, when Ned was killed in King's Landing.
Yeah, I think what's curious is who would have been Hand if Ned had said no. I think Tywin is a possibility. I think Renly would have probably tried
That's
to
what he
convince
should have
him to
done. Is he probably should have made Renly his hand like a long time ago, or at least made better use of Renly. Like, I mean, I guess Renly didn't really. He wasn't working against Robert. He was only like trying to put himself over Stannis. Robert didn't make use of Stannis, though. That's for sure.
Well, Stannis' hand would have just caused a world of trouble for him. Robert and Stannis had very competing visions for the Seven Kingdoms, and that would have been such a serious situation that might have even gotten Robert to show up to a couple small councils. So tough to say, but I do think he would have probably settled on Renly as hand, and I think that might have caused some issues with the Lannisters because I think Tywin would have expected himself to be the next option. But ultimately, again, the major pieces are all still at play here because you're still going to have the Targaryen restoration movement. You're still going to have Varys and Littlefinger with their agendas. That's the thing. It's like there's only so much free will in this story, especially when there are people messing with everyone behind the scenes. It's like
That's
he says to Illyrio.
Sorry, you froze for a second. Start over.
I was saying it's like what Varys says to Illyrio. He says this is no longer a game for two players if it ever was. Like, it was still a game. There was still a game happening.
Somebody in the chat is saying they missed the fan art I use in my programs. The fan art is on the produced videos. Live streams has a live chat in the notes. That's how it works. Live streams are more like a podcast. Produced videos are more like a documentary. Who is Cameron and why is he here? Cameron, just to say again, you are from the Bulwark and also FY Pod, where you talk all things politics. That's probably the simplest way to say it, right?
Yeah, political commentator, gets involved with a bunch of hoo-ha. What if Prince Baelor Breakspear did not die?
Yeah, so we just mentioned him. So he would have become depends on if he lives through the spring sickness that hits right after the Hedge Knight, which took out a bunch of other people. But if he survived that too, then he's a strong king. Who was king instead? Basically Daeron.
Yeah.
And then after Daeron, it's
well, so here's one of the things about Baelor.
The first.
Here's one of the things about Baelor. With Baelor comes an issue that really came out during the Blackfyre Rebellion. This is something that I think a lot of people forget in the Blackfyre Rebellion story, which is the anti-Dornish sentiment in Westeros. There's a lot of anti-Dornish sentiment and a lot of the anger that Daemon Blackfyre was tapping, especially with those like Marcher lords and those smaller lords in the Reach and in the Stormlands and everything, who had histories of clashes with the Dornish. Was those rumors that they were spreading that King's Landing had basically been infiltrated by these lower class and dirty Dornish. The Miriam Martell marriage did ruffle a lot of feathers, and Daemon Blackfyre was playing into that and sort of trying to scapegoat the Dornish.
I'm just afraid of spicy food and lively women, honestly. It's pretty lame to hate the Dornish.
But I mean, a lot of, because of just the history of the clashes that they had during the Seven Kingdoms era, during the pre-Aegon era, there's a lot of enmity between especially Reach houses and Stormland houses with the Dornish. So I still think there would have been some, insurrection fomented a little bit with all of that.
I should have just said spicy food and spicy women. Yes, I missed that. I think a lot of the resentment for the Dornish comes from the fact that they held out much longer against the Targaryens and everyone else, and they sort of have a little more freedom. I think it could be as simple as that, and it's also just like basic tribalism of like those people are different on the other side of the mountains, so he hates them, you know. And then there's various other incidents during various wars in Dorne where certain Tyrells and Oakhearts and people from the Reach are massacred and killed in various ways. But what were they doing in the Dornish desert? You know, get the F out. So anyway, I do love me some Dornish. And I made a big Blackfire Rebellion video where I broke down all the history of Dorne and the Seven Kingdoms. So I went into that in detail if anyone wants that. What if Dany went to Asshai as Jorah wanted, as we discussed so badly, after the dragons were born, rather than crossing the Red Waste? Well, the books would be longer, so we didn't have time for that. I do think that George decided that showing Asshai might take away too much of the mystery. I think he might have been able to write a couple chapters where they go and they have to leave pretty quick and everything's foggy. That doesn't give away too much, but it just would have taken too much time.
Can I do you one better and answer this really quick?
Sure.
They all would have starved. If you look at a map of the world of Ice and Fire, to actually get to Asshai by land or by sea, they were already in serious trouble when Daenerys decided to change course and go to Astapor. Like, they were running out of food.
Yeah.
They were running out of water. It was not a pretty situation. And
that's a good point.
In the beginning of Storm and Swords, Daenerys' fleet was just not in a position to make it even to Marine, much less Asshai.
You're right. Going to Asshai is something you do when you have a lot of resources, like Corlys Velaryon, to make a trip. You don't go there with nothing. That's not a good plan. So Viserys not getting his golden crown and surviving until later could be interesting. Yeah, but the thing is, he's so obnoxious that it was inevitable. It's almost a miracle that he lasted as long as he did. He was never going to survive that Dothraki excursion because he had the wrong attitude. He wasn't trying to survive there. He was just like demanding and putting his foot down and becoming increasingly unstable. So I don't know how much longer he really could have survived. Now, Viserys' absence obviously catalyzes Dany's arc because she stops thinking about Viserys as the last Targaryen and thinks about herself as the last Targaryen, and that changes her identity. She also begins to adopt his long-term mission of going back and retaking Westeros. She doesn't really believe in it in the way that he did, and I think that's setting up a certain, you know, the moment when Dany's going to forego chasing the Iron Throne to go north and deal with the real threat or whatever. But that's Dany analysis. I don't want to get into all that. I've done a lot of stuff on that. What do you think about Viserys?
I mean, it's just, you can't even ask that question really, because Viserys getting the Golden Crown, if he didn't get the Golden Crown, they would have stabbed him or they would have choked him. Like, the question is, what if Viserys was a completely different guy?
And then he's not Viserys, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, there's really not much wiggle room there. That was going to happen one way or the other. What if Dunk lost the Trial of Seven? Even if we don't know what he does in Summerhall, that puts the Targs at only 2 living members, I think.
Well,
a poorly worded question. I think what they were trying to, unclear wording rather, what they were saying is like, we don't have to know exactly what happens at Summerhall, but we know that Dunk saved people. And so if he wasn't there, none of those people would have been, like, Rhaegar would have died, probably. Rhaegar probably would have died.
The problem is the Trial by 7, there's just way too much time in between that. So, you know, there would just be
in between that and what you froze for a second.
There's just too much time in between the Trial of 7 and Summerhall. I mean, that's what, like 40, 50 years?
Yeah. 60.
So, like, yeah, maybe Egg would have been a different kind of king.
50,
Egg would not have done all those reforms for the small folk. And
yes,
that might
Egg's a different person. I think that's probably the good answer. Egg is a different person. He's just another Targaryen. Without Dunk's guidance, he would maybe turn out like his brothers. So, yeah. It's hard to say what if there, but I like this question because it's putting, you know, the spotlight on the fact that, like, Dunk's surviving made a huge difference. And it's hinted at right in that scene when he's talking to Maekar. And then, of course, we can see it having the long view of history. So it's not even that, what would have happened without him is interesting, but it's the fact that it was an unlikely thing. And because it did happen, everything was different. So
yeah.
What if Bran had died from his fall? Well, nobody would be able to ever fix the Weirwood net, and the Long Night 2.0 would kill everyone. That's my first answer. Bran can't die because he's got to fix the Weirwood net and inherit whatever Bloodraven's doing. Or if you think Bran is evil, then maybe this is traveling back in time to kill baby Hitler. And this is a good thing, but I don't subscribe to that myself. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Bran is the character, and if you read George's original outline, you know that there's a reason Bran was the first chapter of the story. Bran was the first character in Ice and Fire that George had ever conceptualized. A lot of people think that it's Daenerys because the first written material that was ever released from Ice and Fire were the first 8 chapters of Daenerys' story in a Game of Thrones in some other collection. I forget what it was called. But the Ice and Fire came to George in a dream about Bran witnessing the execution and then finding the direwolf pups, and everything just sort of stemmed from that. So in my opinion, if I had to guess how this all ends, Bran probably negotiates a peace with the others, and he probably does it from the Isle of Faces. I think that's what's being set up, is that Bran needs to get down to the Isle of Faces, and it's there for a reason. I think Isle of Faces is the opposite of what Asshai is. Asshai is this thing that's shrouded in mystery and talked about a lot that we're never going to see. And the Isle of Faces is something that we haven't seen because there are secrets there that we are going to find. And George is a hippie. He's anti-war. He doesn't want the others to be defeated in some great battle between good and evil. He's already said, this ain't Tolkien. Mm-hmm. He probably wants a peace to be negotiated because, again, they're called the Others, and Others is a sociological word for a different group of people who is
otherization. Absolutely
framed a certain way. So if Bran had just died from the fall, then the story would have gone a certain way, probably fairly similar, and then Westeros would have fallen to the Others, and the question is just what would have happened to Essos, because we don't really know necessarily how real the myths are that suggest that perhaps there are others over there as well. So, we just don't know.
Yeah, just to put a bow on your point there, I would say the number one theme of Ice and Fire is division and reconciliation, even more than the use of power, which is frequently cited as the main theme. It's certainly a big one, and it's pointless to maybe argue about it. But reconciliation is a huge one. We see it just over and over again on all layers of the story. The problem that grudges cause and resentment causes, when it's not dealt with, and the power of reconciliation. So the story of the Others is going to be a reconciliation thing. I totally agree with that. What if Ned had been sent to the wall instead of Joffrey executing him? That is what they were trying to do. Everyone except for Littlefinger, who's probably the one who talked Joffrey into doing this. If Ned goes to the wall, he tells Jon who he is, probably, and that's just kind of like too much power at the wall for the Lannisters to ever be comfortable with. They would constantly be fearing the Starks. They wouldn't feel secure about that, really. Now that I'm thinking about it.
I mean, they should, because even if Ned tells Jon who he is, which I'm sure he will, they both keep their vows to the Night's Watch, because Ned is a vows guy.
Yeah.
Ned is an honor guy. And at the end of the day, Maester Aemon didn't go down and become king. He had sworn his vow. He had sworn his oath as a maester and everything. So I think Jon finding out his true parentage would have definitely caused him to think some things, because he does think about wanting to be some sort of powerful figure. He does think about wanting to not just be a bastard. But I think if he had any ideas of going down and claiming the throne that is so rightfully his, Ned would have been like, yeah, sorry, buddy, you swore your oath.
I actually don't know about that. Ned, if the Lannisters had retained control of Sansa, and Ned's up at the wall, and he's hearing about stuff like that, like, I don't know. I think Ned might have found a way to pull some strings. That's an interesting question. Like, Ned is honor bound, yes, but he's also very passionate about his family. And he did participate in a rebellion, and he did kill a bunch of Kingsguard because they were in between him and Lyanna. Like, Ned is kind of a badass. And I don't know if he would have been content to just sit on the wall forever while the Lannisters made a muck of things. But I don't have anything specific that I could say that he might have done.
I think his hands would have largely been tied because, I mean, what could he have done other than send Jon to Winterfell, have him amass forces that are loyal to the Starks and just don't care that he's a Night's Watch deserter? I mean, Ned started the story beheading a Night's Watch deserter. It's
well,
just
Robb.
a really
So Robb is alive. He only went south because Ned was murdered. So Robb is the Lord of Winterfell. Maybe that's what would have happened. Is like Robb would have been content to let the Lannisters have Sansa. Maybe he would have caused trouble.
yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I think a lot of the major story beats still go almost exactly the same at the end of the day.
Greyways, Tim is in the chat. Tim, if you have a what if that you'd like us to chew on, feel free to throw it out and I'll grab it from you. Let's see here. What if Bran had named Jaime as his attacker? Not a lot's different because basically Catelyn and Ned made that accusation. They accused Tyrion, right? Catelyn did, and then Ned kind of backed her up. So it still amounts to the same thing. Like, they weren't in the political position to throw those kind of claims at the Lannisters and come out on top, even if they were correct.
Yeah, pretty much everything stays the same. What if Robert and Rhaegar were closer, being cousins and whatnot? There's just too many factors at play because that would mean Robert wasn't getting fostered at the Vale. That would mean that Robert would have been. I mean, I don't really see how Robert and Rhaegar could have been closer because if Robert wasn't at the Vale, he would have been at Storm's End.
That's another one where it's like if they had been different people, they wouldn't be who they were, kind of a thing. Like they were never going to get. They weren't friends. They weren't naturally compatible.
And no, but even if they were the same people and they were in circumstances where they could have been closer, like Rhaegar was a poet and a dreamer, and it's kind of a miracle that Robert and Ned even got along. So
they got along because Ned reminded Robert of Stannis, and Robert reminded Stannis of Brandon because they're similar. So it was kind of like lock and key. They were used to hanging out with that type of personality. That's what George did there.
Yeah, that makes sense. What if Rhaegar hadn't chose Lyanna for the Queen of Love and Beauty? You know?
I mean, what if he had given it to his wife instead, like he should have, like normal people would? Well,
I mean, look, theoretically, if Rhaegar were as smart as people said Rhaegar was, he would have given it to his wife and then ran away with Lyanna anyway. All he was doing was telling on himself.
That's one of the most inexplicable things of this entire mess, honestly, is why did Rhaegar feel the need to do that?
But dudes can be pretty hubristic. You know, there's a lot of people in public life. And
I feel like Rhaegar could have been more discreet. Yeah, you think? That's what we're saying. Go ahead.
Yeah, just like, you know, I mean, I can't get into current events for work purposes, but there's a lot of people in public life right now and in politics who do certain things where you're like, how could you have possibly done that? You knew that this was going to be a disaster, and yet here they are doing them. So, you know, Rhaegar, I think he felt very high on his own supply as this person who thought that he was this prophesized, you know, savior or whatever, or he was the parents to the prophesized saviors, whatever. He was just going to do that. And had he chosen Elia as his Queen of Love and Beauty and ran away with Lyanna, maybe everybody would have been a little bit slower to catch on to what he was doing, but ultimately same broad strokes.
Yeah. Yep. We're still waiting to figure this out. What the hell Rhaegar... Being high on his own supply is certainly how I portray my fake Rhaegar character. He's very confident and cheerful and optimistic. So I really think that when George gave us John the Fiddler in the third Dunk and Egg novella, that he's giving us probably the closest window to what Rhaegar was like. Maybe not quite as cheerful, but like, oh, we're gonna overthrow the kingdom and fulfill the prophecy and hatch a dragon. It's gonna be great, guys. You know, like.
I think you're probably right.
Let's see here. What if Jaime obeys Aerys? Then Aerys blows up King's Landing and lots of people die. And Robert is still the king and stuff, but it's just that there's been this horrible massacre of civilians in King's Landing, and they'd have to like rebuild a lot of the city.
Yeah, broad strokes, everything remains the same. Maybe they, while rebuilding the Red Keep, moves. They make Storm's End just the seat of the king until then. Because I don't see Robert being like, you know what, I want to go to Dragonstone, which is really just the symbolic seat of Targaryen power for the heir of the king.
I only want to go to Dragonstone to smash it to smithereens.
Yeah, he probably would have gone back to Storm's End, and there would have been a prolonged process of rebuilding King's Landing, and it would have been a mess because Littlefinger would have probably been very involved in the finances, and there would have been a lot of corruption and a lot of deals cut on the side. But other than that, Robert's still the king. Like, it was over.
Yep. Moving the capital to Storm's Land. I think you could sell Robert on that idea. Thank you. Ironic. Clonic. Let's see. What if Jon Snow kept his friends at Castle Black after he became Lord Commander? Yeah, we mentioned this earlier. You know, he didn't bother to sell his decisions. He didn't keep... So that would have been the point of keeping Dolorous Edd and other people there so that they could sell his decisions to the other men, keep an ear out for what everyone was talking about. It was just a huge political blunder to do that. And, you know, maybe he doesn't get assassinated, but ultimately they're probably still going to try. There's still all the same causes for the resentment of Bowen Marsh and other people are still there. It's just that this isolated Jon faster, you know, so I don't know that that's a huge what if.
And he's also going to die. He's also going to die either way because, like, okay, he manages to get away with abandoning his oath to go down to Winterfell to rescue fake Arya, who was already out of Winterfell at that point. He marches wildlings down during a blizzard to Winterfell. Him and his wildling band would have just died in the blizzard. How do you storm a heavily fortified, gigantic, city-sized castle with a bunch of wildlings who don't even really understand how that type of combat works anyway?
They might get the snowshoe part of the equation going, but you're kind of right. Like, yeah, that's assaulting Winterfell with a bunch of wildlings in a snowstorm would probably not go very well.
Because even if he was able to do what Stannis was able to do in the TV show to kill time, which is somehow manage to get Ramsay out of the castle for
what if Robert hadn't died from the boar accident and learned the truth?
I mean, he would have had Cersei executed.
That's what Ned thinks.
I mean, 1,000,000%. Robert beat Cersei. I mean, he couldn't stand Cersei. He would have loved an opportunity to get rid of her with cause and marry like a 14-year-old girl. Robert would have jumped at that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then the Tyrells come in with Marjorie and sew that up pretty quick, probably. Yeah. What if Jon never returned to the Wall and the Night's Watch? What if he started that family with Ygritte he thought about? Well, he just would have been... I mean, he was basically written off as dead, I think, once him and Qhorin, Half-Hand, and their party of 5 disappeared in the Frostfangs and never came back. Like, they only learned Jon was alive because he came back to Castle Black after escaping the Wildlings after having crossed the wall. So if Jon stays in the cave with Ygritte, the Wildlings still climb the wall and they still attack Castle Black, but they're probably successful because Castle Black doesn't get the warning from Jon. Castle Black falls, they open the gate, and the Wildlings come through the gate. Actually, that's what would have happened. Because Magnar,
guess what?
He almost took down Castle Black as it is. Go ahead.
The Wildlings pillage in the north and they kidnap in the north. And at the end of the day, they can't take the north because if we are taking any sort of medieval combat into consideration, they can't really take Winterfell. Wait, hold on. Is anybody even in Winterfell at this point in Storm?
No, it's pretty empty.
And I don't know the exact number, but what's the rule? Like one man inside a castle fortress is worth like 30,
something
60.
like that. I don't know that it's taking Winterfell that they would be their objective because I don't know that they give a crap about Winterfell. They'd want to take a certain amount of land to hold it for themselves, but basically they'd be running into opposition from like the Umbers and the Mountain Clans and the Boltons. None of those people like the Wildlings. The Mormonts, those people would all basically, come and fight with the Wildlings. If the Wildlings fight well enough, maybe they negotiate a truce and get a parcel of land and integrate. Maybe they get wiped out.
But either way, I mean, if the Wildlings can get knocked out by a couple of guys hanging out with Stannis, they're getting decimated by the others. They're getting decimated.
Yeah. You mean the others or the other Northern Lords?
I mean the others as in the others, the White Walkers.
Yeah, well, that's why they came south. It's because they couldn't do anything about they had no way to check their advance. Yeah.
So I understand what they were doing, but it was only going to work for so long.
Oh, this is interesting. Someone in the chat saying, the Wildlings would scatter and hide probably. If they did that, they'd be all picked off one by one and hunted down gradually.
Yeah, what they have is the giant unit.
Yeah.
The giant unit is their strength. They don't have cultural cohesion between them otherwise.
Correct.
And if they broke off into their culturally cohesive groups, they would have just ended up warring with each other pretty quickly as soon as Mance was out of the picture.
They would have been easily picked off by the likes of the Umbers and the Mormonts and the Mountain Clans, etc. So only if they stuck together south of the wall and were able to win either a victory or two or force a negotiation would they have been able to stay. Maybe they would have gone back. Well, no, because of the others. No, they wouldn't have gone back. They would have stayed. Let's see here. Now, if Mance lives and gets through the wall, that's the best case scenario for the Wildlings. Mance might be able to go to some of the Northern Lords with the same sort of thing that he did with Jon. Be like, hey, White Walkers are coming. Some of the people in the North believe in that. So maybe he's able to, work.
I mean, they
out.
hate the Wildlings. They hate the Wildlings.
They do. They really do.
The Wildlings have historically stolen their daughters and killed them, and there have been these uprisings at the wall. It would have been a disaster.
Well, and the whole thing, to go back to your point about the others representing an otherized group of people, the Wildlings are the otherized group of people. So that is not an accident that we have the supernatural others and then the otherized first men of the Wildlings north of the wall. That is all of a piece. So you're right. The anti-Wildling racism is very strong and stronger than people's. They would have had to have seen White Walkers before they started aligning with Wildlings, And even that. What if Howland came to Winterfell instead of sending his kits? We couldn't leave Shara Dane alone in the swamp.
Who even is Howland? Who even is Howland Reed? Who is that bum Howland Reed, the fakest best friend of all time? I don't even want to talk about that loser.
Oh, wow. Listen to this. He's been to the Isle of Faces, Okay,
and what does he have to show for it? What has he even done? All right,
Shara Dane, the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. He married her and took her home to the swamp and had 2 kids with her.
And then he didn't show up for anybody at all.
What do you mean?
Well, what has Howland Reed done in the books?
Well, he saved Ned at the Tower of Joy.
Sure.
Somehow.
Yeah, in flashback.
And then he went home to the chat. Yeah, you lost the chat. The chat's turning on you. He went home.
Chat, just tell me Tell me what Howland Reed has done to help the good guys in the book.
What was he asked to do that he didn't do?
Well, when you march a gigantic army through the neck, if he knows anything about what's going on in his domain, he probably would have come and joined them, given how loyal he was to Ned. But he just hasn't done anything. Unless listen, there are some people, I'm not one of these people. There are some people who think that he's the High Sparrow. And listen,
I don't tend to think so.
I love crackpot theory, so I will always support believers. But it's like, he didn't help Robb. He didn't do anything to help Robb.
That is a good question, why he didn't join Robb's host. Is there a reason that we're given? Not really.
No.
That is an interesting question. They fought the Ironborn. Yeah, thank you, Darby Sword. They did. They picked off those Ironborn when they were camping out at Moat Cailin. They surrounded it and basically picked them off a few at a time. So there you go. They did something.
Yeah, I call foul.
All right, well, there you go. Not a Howland Reed fan. What if he came to Winterfell instead of sending his kids? I don't know. I think he sent his kids because probably Jojen had that dream and shared it with him. The thing is, we don't know anything about Howland Reed. We don't know what his understanding of things are as far as like RLJ. He kind of probably knows about that, almost certainly. So we don't know what his motivations or instructions are. It's a huge something that George just has not told us. I think you kind of get the feeling that Howland Reed knows too much to be involved in the main story until George is ready to. And so there's almost like an unnatural keeping Howland away from everything that is translating into hatred for Howland in your heart, Cameron. But I think it's mostly a blame George situation here.
I know, but since the writer is God, all I can say is that if I were anybody loyal to the Stark cause and I saw Howland Reed, I'd be like, where have you been? What have you been doing?
Yeah, I just think it's mostly a result of about George just keeping him off screen. And we just don't know, again, we don't know what his motives are or what his knowledge of the situation is. But it's true that they didn't really do anything until they came to Moat Cailin and started picking off Ironborn. New video will be up tomorrow. So what if you all went and subscribed to the Greyway Stib channel? I love that, Tim. Everybody do go and subscribe because he has been working on a big video and it is coming out tomorrow. Also, shout out Estella Graves, who came out with a cool House of the Dragon video today about probably the most interesting leak that people are talking about. So if you don't want any leak talk, don't watch it. But if you're interested, it's pretty good stuff. So check out Estella's video as well. And mods, if you could throw a link to Tim's, there it is. Didn't even have to ask. What would Oberyn be doing if he survived the trial by combat? We already talked about this a little bit. What would he be doing? Well, he was supposed to collect information and maybe go back to Doran and continue plotting with him. I think he would have returned to Doran and gotten ready for their next move. Or he would have made whatever if Doran and him had worked out stuff he was supposed to do in King's Landing. Hard to say because he got pretty stuck on killing the Mountain.
Yeah, I don't know how far ahead Oberyn was thinking. Oberyn, like you said earlier, Doran seems like the one who's probably taking the future into consideration a bit more than Oberyn is. But I imagine Oberyn might have been a contender for hand to whichever Targaryen Doran ended up going with, whether it was, whether Quentyn somehow magically managed to convince Daenerys to marry him, which I don't think Doran actually thought was going to happen.
Hold on. Let's back up a little bit. During the fight, he gets Gregor to confess to the murder of Elia, and then he dies. But if he wins, he would then immediately begin pressing the case against Tywin and trying to hold Tywin accountable for the murder of Elia, so that he actually would have continued to cause huge problems in King's Landing. I don't know if he would have had enough Dornish spears there to press the case against Tywin. So maybe a lot of people think that he poisoned Tywin. And I think that is possible.
I think there's a lot of evidence for that too. In which case, then
the
it's
big
like,
one being
right,
the stink, the Tywin stink. Yeah.
the Tywin stink, and that apparently he looked very red at one point or something like that. I don't remember exactly what. But he was on the toilet, and then he smelled like that during it. But the question is, like, all right, and again, I do subscribe to Oberyn poison Tywin theory. I think it's pretty sound. Then was the purpose of getting the confession just to hear the confession? Because if you're gonna poison Tywin, you'd think the confession would be so he could use it against Tywin. But if he had already poisoned Tywin,
it can also shape the politics, Cameron. So, like, even just spreading the idea that Tywin has done this thing, now people aren't necessarily going to try to bring his killer to justice when he dies, and people just being like, oh, well, a bad person died, he deserved it or whatever. But I do think you're right. It was mostly about getting the confession and hearing it and having it accounted for. Yeah. But the public knowledge is powerful too. It undermines the Lannisters. Was the point?
If there ends up being hypothetically a meeting between Doran and whichever Targaryen / Blackfyre they end up colluding with, if Oberyn survives, I could see him being a real contender for Hand.
Yeah, he would be a great pick for sure. He is feared and is politically skilled both. Just couldn't quite. I mean, I can't really blame him, honestly, for being pretty fixated on bringing the mountain low. I mean, I think if someone had committed the crimes that were committed against Elia and her children, I mean, what else do you have to do but kill those people, really, if you're a Dornish prince? So I get it. What if Arya had not gone to Braavos? She basically would be a refugee wandering around the Riverlands. However, she would still begin to make psychic connection with Nymeria as she has in Braavos. She would still be leading the wolf pack at night. So if she managed to survive, which is dicey because she's an 11-year-old girl in war-torn Westeros in A Feast for Crows at that point, if she had survived, she still would have begun having that dream contact with Nymeria. She may have eventually been able to call the wolf pack to help her escape wherever she was and joined up with the wolf pack, as she will eventually. But now she's going to have all this increased discipline and training and skills that she learned from the Faceless Men when she comes back to lead the wolf pack. So that would be my answer.
I agree with all of that.
So what if Robb had married Rosalind Frey like he promised? See, what you're really asking is, would the Freys still have done what they did? Probably not. Probably not, because then they're riding the Starks to power. Then Robb's child is going to be half Frey, king in the north. And that's kind of the whole goal. Now, you still can't trust Walder Frey, but the Red Wedding probably would not have happened. I mean, definitely wouldn't have.
So then the question is, because, again, even before the Red Wedding, Robb isn't in a great place. There have been some big miscalculations by this point in Storm, and Robb is now trying to march north with this kind of contrived plan to take Moat Cailin from the Ironborn, which has been set up as this nearly impossible task. And he has a plan. He doesn't not have a plan. But Robb is retreating to the north and leaving the Riverlands largely open to getting, even more ravaged than they have before. And that's kind of why I do think the Riverlands were the impossible position that Robb was put in when he was crowned king in the north. Because, if he had just been crowned king in the north, seceded, and held his position in the north, I don't understand how they could have beaten him. The problem was,
no one's going to war with the entire north just to collect taxes. No.
Yeah. So Robb is a Tully, and he was crowned in the Riverlands, and he would have lost all respect, and he would have needed respect to hold strong as king. He would have lost all respect as king in the North if he was like, all right, guys, you've now crowned me king. We're going to do a secession and a rebellion. By the way, sorry, Riverlands, we're going to make you go get punished for being,
You're
under
right.
the watch of.
Yeah, you're right. The Riverlands was hard for the Northerners to hold. Really, that
It
is
was just an
difficult.
impossible situation.
Yeah.
It was an impossible situation for Robb because Robb had no choice but to become essentially the king of the rivers in the North. Um, heritage and I'm pausing due to his Tully heritage and the physical position he was in at the time. So had Robb just been king in the North, like the kings of Winter were, he would have been fine. But again,
Yes.
his hand was forced. It was always going to happen like that.
Yeah, yeah. In that sense, his only choice was to topple the Lannisters. That's the only way he could provide safety for all of his people. Yeah. So here's another question about Jon. We kind of already, it's the same question. Why didn't he explain his plans better to people? He's probably, I think that as soon as he let the wildlings through the wall, it was a certainty that people were going to try to kill him. I think even before he said, "Oh, we're gonna march on Winterfell" and all that stuff, everyone was already making the plan. Because if you noticed, they came out of that shield hall after he had said, "Okay, I'm going to take the wildlings and go to Winterfell." They murdered him right after that. They already had the plan in place. In other words, they didn't just hack it together in 5 minutes. Like they already, in all likelihood anyway, they already had that. They were already co-conspiring, and then they decided to act in that moment because of what was going on. But I think it's really letting the wildlings through the wall. Because you saw in that meeting where Jon is telling Bowen Marsh and the other people, "I'm going to let the wildlings through the wall." They're all like just raising every objection, and he basically just tells them to shut up and eat it. And I think that was it. He signed his death warrant in that moment, in my opinion. Even though it was the right thing to do, clearly, to let the wildlings through the wall and not let them starve and die. That was when the assassination became a certainty. What if Asha had won the kingsmoot? Asha Queen. Love this question. Big Asha fan. Loved her speech at the Queen's. Let's call it the Queensmoot. She would have been able to potentially modernize the Ironborn because she would have done it partially through language they can understand, which is conquest. Basically, she's saying, "Hey, we've already partially conquered these lands in the north. They're a lot more fertile than the Iron Islands, you guys. They've got trees and stuff there, and tall pines for building ships and lands to farm and settle." And basically, she's saying, "Let's hold these lands and then force the North to accept us and essentially just take more holdings." And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, essentially sue for peace with the North. I don't think the Boltons would have let that happen. I think the Boltons wanted the North. And I know this isn't like one of the fun factors to take into consideration, but winter is coming, and holding the North would have been just a different task for the Ironborn during the blizzards, because I don't think that's really, the Ironborn are skilled at a certain type of fighting. I think they're a lot better at taking things than they are at holding them. So,
but the only way they were rooted out was because Stannis came with a giant army and organized the mountain clans, you know what I mean, to go and clear out the Ironborn. So if Stannis doesn't bring that army and that impetus, they probably would have been able to hold a lot of those lands for at least a little while. I do think you're right that the Boltons might eventually have found a way to go to battle with them, but it was a good plan. It could have made sense. The Ironborn only do not sow because they don't really have a friggin' choice. There's like no farmland on the Iron Islands, so that's why they've become raiders and thieves and stuff. So I definitely think some of them would be like, "Oh yeah, no, I'll have lots of food and stuff. Like that's pretty cool." Because remember, like the Ironborn aren't all the same. You have your good brothers who are happy to mine in the earth and barely ever go down to the water. They don't say it, you know what I mean? Like they're a land-based enterprise. So I do think there is some people that would take up the farming. But then she'd have to deal with, if she wins the election, she still has to deal with Euron. So that would still be a problem.
Yeah, Euron's going to be up to something. It's just a question of, I guess, this is a tough one to say because we don't necessarily know what impact Euron's going to have on the story yet. We don't know how Eldritch God he's going to be. We don't know. I don't even
11. These amps go to 11. It's one more.
It's treated like Euron is heading for Old Town next, and I understand why people think that, but I don't think that's necessarily a guarantee.
Well, he's basically there already.
Yeah, well, as of what we have in the story right now, that's true. Let me rephrase that. I see Euron going to Old Town. I don't know if he wants to like stay in Old Town. I don't know how much time he actually wants to spend there because, his ambitions are just so shady. Maybe he wants something that's in the maybe he wants something that the Maesters have at the Citadel. Maybe he just wants to continue pillaging. Maybe he just wants to take Old Town to say that he did. It's so hard to say with him. Yeah.
So my vision for this is that he plans on being crowned king in Old Town, as many kings have been, including Aegon the Conqueror. And the whole thing is that like he doesn't have King's Landing. So if he can take over Old Town and be declared king, then it becomes an alternate power base for him until he can take the rest of Westeros. So I think he does set up shop there for a little while before moving on. We know he wants to rule all of Westeros, and we know he's got magical goals. We're not sure what those are exactly, but to your point, yeah, it's hard to exactly pin it down because he does have magical and political goals. But that's what I think about Old Town, is that he's going to be crowned king there. And I think when Jaehaerys and Alysanne went to Old Town, and Alysanne and Silverwing flew to the top of the high tower and fanned the beacon flames, this is all Euron foreshadowing for Viserion flying to the tower, Hands of White Fire Lady being involved, who I think is probably Melora Hightower with her books of spells. I think they've got a glass candle up there. And so this is basically like Sauron corrupting Saruman through the Palantir. Okay, so Leighton and Melora are Saruman, and they're atop the tower. They've been using the glass candle, and I think Euron has already corrupted or worked something out with them through the candle. So I think it's an inside job. I think Hightowers are going to crown him king. Leighton might try to work against him later, but I think he's basically, that's what the Hightowers always do. They never fight. They take the new people and integrate them and co-opt them. And they'll probably try to do that with Euron too.
I think that's a pretty good take. I think that's a pretty good read.
Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right, but yeah, that's my theory about it. So, what if Baelor the Blessed had not burned mushrooms and Barth's books? Well, we'd have a lot more lore. Part of the point of the destruction of the dragon lore is so that it's not around. So that people like Tyrion and Dany have to guess and try to figure it out. So basically there'd just be too much information left. And that's part of keeping all this stuff a mystery. There was another Baelor the Blessed question about what if Daemon Blackfyre is really Baelor's son and all this stuff, but I didn't want to get into that. That's a whole theory, more than a what if. But Baelor the Blessed, he's written to be a bad example of religious fervor. Burning the books, locking up his sisters, ruling the kingdom in wacky ways, trying to replace the ravens with doves, and just like he's a religious fanatic. That's
Here's a real what if. Here's a real what if. What if Orys the First had burned Mushroom and Barth's books?
What if
so? That's a very inside joke. Okay, so basically on the show, I don't know if anybody in chat knows this. I'm sure a couple people do. On the show, Tywin is quizzing Tommen, and he's going through some Targaryen history with Tommen, and he's like, "What was Baelor the Blessed a good king? Was this Targaryen a good king? Was this Targaryen a good king? Orys the First did this," and there's no Orys the First in the story. That's a complete creation of the show.
No, it's Orys Baratheon. Well, he's not the first, though. Yeah, I guess.
That's the thing. So Tywin says Orys the First. So there's a couple explanations of that. It could either be Tywin knows that Tommen, as like a 10-year-old or however old he is on the show, it's, they're not too tight with that, but he knows that Tommen doesn't actually know the Targaryen history, so he doesn't really need to give real examples. He could just hypothetically throw stuff around. Or he is talking about a
I don't
Storm
remember
King
that.
named Doris. Or he's talking about a Storm King named Doris. But again, they wouldn't have had the first, at least not in the way they were being talked about right now. So there is kind of just this like random Oris the First that gets mentioned on the show. That I feel like people are allowed to speculate as to what exactly they were thinking for that. But
I don't
maybe it
remember
was
that
just like,
scene at all. Yeah, I don't. I deal with book canon
it's
mostly.
no,
So
it's what happens when so Tywin's quizzing Tommen, and he said, and Tommen's like, this king was good because he was pious, and then Tywin's like, okay, yeah, well, he locked up his sisters and starved himself to death, and then what it leads to is Tywin saying, a good king is wise because he listens to his advisors. It's a really good scene. It's a really good show.
I vaguely remember it, but yeah. Let's see. What if either? I'm not interested in anything about Baelor the Blessed except for pointing out what a nut he is. I'm not like
just how much George like so nakedly hates the religious institutions.
Baelor the Befuddled. That's who he was. Tyrion had the right of that. What if either Egg or Dany found a copy of Barth's On Dragons? That's the same question. It's just too much information. It's got to be a miss. Dany's got to solve it on instinct, so it would ruin all of that. She is going to eventually get some dragon knowledge, but it's going to be delivered just when George wants to. So that's really just a writing thing. Follow up, where would the book be located at? It's not. It doesn't. It's gone. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. What if Dany doesn't stay in Meereen to rule, but sails for Westeros after conquering the city? Well, she doesn't have enough forces. Yet. She really doesn't. And she has no way to get all of her land troops to Westeros. She needs the Iron Fleet. So she can only sail to Westeros with a small contingent at that point.
I mean,
and it's
Dany's
not in her nature. Go ahead.
Dany can't take Westeros unless she makes some key alliances, because Westeros would be very against the Unsullied and the Dothraki. They would see them as these Eastern barbaric things that just could not be part of their structure of society. Like Dothraki culture and Westerosi culture are not things that can just intermingle like that. So Daenerys would need to have them there as a any hope of excuse me, let me just return real quick. For Dany to have any hope of holding the throne or actually being able to make a bigger force, she would need to go in. I think she would need the Dornish. I think she would need a couple key alliances like that, because just the Dothraki and the Unsullied, if anything, that might be a bigger unifying call for the Westerosi to oppose her, because she's coming in with these horse lords that they see as these barbaric people.
Yeah, she'd be able to use them, but you're right. She would need to make a lot of alliances. There's a lot of preparation that needs to be done. That's why she needs Tyrion's help and why George sent Tyrion to her. So yeah. What if the 5-year gap had happened?
The books would be over.
He would have finished writing them by now, you think?
I think he 1,000,000% would have finished writing them. I think that the thing that blew the story up was the contrivances of the Marine plot, which I love, by the way, but it's contrived. I love it. It's one of my favorite parts of the whole series. And all of the intricacies of the Northern politics, and most importantly, the Dornish and Ironborn stories. And the three main reasons, from what I understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the 5-year gap didn't happen was George didn't really know how to pick up Cersei's story with the gap. He had almost everybody set up at the end of Storm for there to be a perfectly sensical Arya's training with the Faceless Men, Jon is Lord Commander, Dany's ruling Marine, Sansa's learning the Game of Thrones and the Vale, all of those things.
Okay.
He could have even skipped the opening of the scene at the beginning of both Feast and Dance, where Jon sends Sam to the Citadel, and they could have just opened the A Dance with Dragons, return from the 5-year gap book saying, yeah, Sam's been at the Citadel for the whole time. And that would make perfect sense.
So that scene, we see it at the end of Storm and in Feast because we see it from both of their perspectives. So Sam was sent to the Citadel at the end of Storm, but that still lines up with what you're saying. Was Sam just is at the Citadel studying for 5 years?
I thought it was at the beginning of Feast and Dance. That's my bad. Yeah, so all of these, except Cersei and the paranoia story, her reaction to like saying that Cersei's just spent 5 entire years crashing out as spectacularly as she crashes out during Feast. Like, that's so much the direct result of the immediate fallout of Tywin's death. But then also George said, well, I can't necessarily have the Dornish just sitting around for 5 years after Oberyn's death and then 5 years later saying, let's take revenge. And with the Ironborn, Balon's already dead. So, and we're already hearing talk that there's some rumblings of a kingsmoot happening. So the Cersei, the Dornish, and the Ironborn put George in a position where he just thought that he needed a book that kind of covers a lot of this. But I mean, I think that if he had done the 5-year gap, yeah, I think the series probably would have ended before 2010.
That might be the biggest what if of the whole stream. That's kind of funny. I hadn't really thought about that. Like maybe that was a mistake and he just should have stuck with it.
I mean, no, look, listen. Okay, before I go, because I have to go in just a minute. I happen to think that A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons are 2 books that are slow and boring and nothing happens. They are also my 2 favorite books in the whole series. Like, I really like all the books. I really like all the books. Clash is my least favorite, and I love Clash, but it is my least favorite. I think Feast is slow and boring and nothing happens, and Dance is slow and boring and nothing happens, but they're so good. They're so good. The George's prose language and characterization are better than they are in the previous books. Correct. George's world building and his politics, everything to love about the first 3 books is even better in Feast and Dance. Except I loved the pacing in A Game of Thrones, and maybe I just love it because it's so different. But I mean, Feast and Dance are just if this series is able to end, the Dornish and Ironborn subversion will be one of the most genius subversions in the history of speculative fiction. The fact that we had these essentially side characters that really felt like they were just kind of extra world building for the first 3 books. We had some Ironborn characters, we had some Dornish characters, but we never got the sense that they were going to be a major player in the plot. The fact that in Feast and Dance, they are now a key to the plot, the subversion of the expectation of now we are going into the end game, George saying, no, guys, the story's actually blowing up in all these directions. I think that is so brilliant. I think that the Dornish and Ironborn subplots are both extremely underrated. I think the Dornish plot is kind of awesome. Like,
I love all that stuff. I'm like you, like, okay, I'm really tired of some of the folks in the chat today. I don't know what is going on here, but like, I'm just not here for some of this stuff. I think that what's going on here is that we love living in Westeros. So even though Feast and Dance kind of meander and they don't, like, there's, the big action payoffs at the end of Dance, the battles of Ice and Fire are put off, which is another reason why they're just sort of existing. But the thing is, that's why we're all here every Sunday. It's because we like to hang out in Westeros. And like, I love all the chapters of Tyrion on the Rhoyne, verbally jousting with Jon Con and Fagon and Halden Halfmaester. I like the Marine plot. I love all the Ironborn stuff. I loved the Asha chapters. Theon chapters are compelling, even though they're disturbing. So yeah, I'm totally with you. I'm dying to know what happens with Obara and Darkstar. I don't even know if Darkstar is the one who wounded Marcella. Or maybe that's not Marcella. Like, what is?
Oh yeah, I like that theory. I like that theory. I like the Marcella body double theory. No, I'm saying, like, you guys can't get too mad at me for saying that those books are boring and because let me be clear, let me be clear. Those are the ones I reread. Those are the ones that I reread. I think that they are so great, and it's really just a testament to George's understanding of this world and of these characters, because it, even in the parts of the story where we are just watching characters tread water, it's so good. And the more cerebral we get, my favorite POV in the whole series, I'm curious what yours is probably Cersei Feast. And I think that one of the top three is probably Theon and Dance. I think Theon and Dance thematically, just from where we find him in the first Reek chapter, especially if you haven't watched the show and you don't know that Theon is Reek yet.
It takes you half the chapter to figure out that Reek is Theon or whatever it is, and it's one of the most horrifying revelations. The way that George builds it up, it's masterful. I also want to add that John's A Dance with Dragons chapters are exceptional. Like, we've done a lot of rereads of those. They are very interesting. They are very well written. So I couldn't agree with you more on this point. Feast and Dance are my favorite to reread and to marinate in, even though they are a lot less slower paced than the first three. Like, there's no denying
and
that.
He adds in all these characters, and even the ones that people are like not that hot on, at least thematically, are so good. Like,
Quentin Martell's story is awesome. It's fun as hell to read.
Well, also, George was a conscientious objector to Vietnam, and Quentin Martell's story is him writing about what if I went to Vietnam, because Quentin is a lot like George. George sees himself as this kind of ugly, dork nerd. I mean, he says that his self-insert is Sam. I think the Quentin story is, what if I went to Nam?
That's really interesting. You're not wrong.
And sort of like Vietnam, Quentin's quest is
adventure stank. He can feel he's pulled towards it, but he knows it's not going to be good. Yeah, you're not wrong.
And he knows that it's ultimately kind of meaningless, and there wasn't a real good reason for him to be sent there in the first place. And then he goes and he sees the horror of war. And I have this friend who works for Amnesty International who has done war zone reporting and has done human rights reports on the ground. She's 44 right now. She's been doing this since she was about 20 years old. She was the roving correspondent in Africa and the Middle East for Al Jazeera for longer than half of the time I've currently spent on Earth. And one of the things she said to me that feels so simple, but just coming from her, given what she's experienced, was so impactful, was we were watching Al Jazeera together. We were watching coverage of the war. And she said, people don't understand what war is if they haven't seen it. People treat this all like it's a game. I think I paused again.
That was the first one that was good, though. Like, you said something declarative and then it paused on your firm face. Like, that was beautiful.
Yeah, people don't understand war until they've seen it. And, I can't get into it, but I've seen some pretty terrible humanitarian crises with my own eyes. And it is true that, like, when we're watching it in the media, it does feel like we're watching people who think that they're playing some sort of game, when you see the human toll on the ground, it's this completely different thing. And that's this Quentin story is Doran Martell is playing the Game of Thrones, but he's not taking into consideration like what all of this actually is. And then Quentin goes and he sees it for himself. And it's this unbelievable story. And
you're so right. Like, Quentin has the shock, like, he can't, like, he sees people's guts being emptied out. Someone tries to kill him and he's like frozen. Like, this, you're totally right about all of this. Yeah.
And by the way, someone just mentioned Kristen Cole. I think that's one of the best things in House of the Dragon. Again, like, I didn't want to talk about House of the Dragon. Doesn't mean I don't like House of the Dragon. Doesn't mean I'm not excited for more House of the Dragon. Don't get me wrong. But I think that Kristen Cole's writing on House of the Dragon is the best adaptation of Feast for Crows we've gotten in TV, Ice and Fire, because those long monologues that he has about war and about how, while the dragons dance, we're all ashes under their feet. That is the ruminations on war that we were getting in A Feast for Crows. That was the experiences we were having with Brienne and all of them going through the Riverlands. So
I think the fandom is smart. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, this has just been my lengthy defense of everybody cooking me for saying feast and dance are boring. Let me be clear. Um, they're so good.
No,
They're so good. They're the
I
best.
think most people understand what you're saying. I knew what you meant right away. It's fine. And I do think
But anyway,
the
I have to
Kristen Cole
hop.
stuff this season is going to be interesting. So yeah, I'll let you go. I know you got arranged engagements and stuff. So thank you for your time. Appreciate you. I'll have you back on sometime
Much
soon.
love,
And
dude. Thanks, chat. Everybody have a great night. See ya.
there it is. Cool. So there've been some squirrely activity in the chat. I do appreciate all y'all. There's been a couple of rogue actors, but that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. I mean, most of the time I have guests on here that like agree with most of what I say, but like it's okay to have some different ideas, especially like about the Dragon Bond or Howland Reed. I didn't see the Howland Reed thing coming, but there it is. He has been absent. You can't deny it. So let me see if I want to do. Oh, I'm halfway through this bloody doc. Look how I'm on page 9 of 20. I've got all. I can't do all of those, you guys. I can't do that. I will do another we're at 1 hour 56 minutes, so I'll give you a few more, and then I'll probably have to dip out. Well, I'll tell you what. If you guys want to throw any from the chat, I will try to give you guys a little attention and read a couple if you need. No, I'm not going to do a 6-hour stream. I need to get back to my first man video, which I've now edited about 1 hour and 30 minutes out of 1 hour and 47 minutes. So I'm coming down the home stretch. In case you haven't heard, giant true history of the first man documentary. The biggest video I've ever made is going to drop either Tuesday or Wednesday, second or third day of next week, depending on. So, what if Rhaegar killed Loras at the hands tourney? That would be sad, first of all. And Renly's whole arc of allying with the Tyrells could have changed. I don't think the Hooded Man is a faceless man. No, I think that's Galbert Glover, who's like the James Bond of the North. What if Sandor had killed Gregor there? Well, then Gregor doesn't go on to sack the Riverlands and do all that stuff. What would Hound be like if he had been able to kill his brother? He might have been able to move on and go on to some different things in the world. Would have been happy for him. What if the arm had never broken? I don't know what to tell you about that. Well, the weather would be nicer in Storm's End. What if Ned had believed the Night's Watch deserter? That's a good one. If he had believed the Night's Watch deserter about the others, whatever his incoherent babblings were, we're talking about Garrett, then he may have been able to start strengthening the wall and paying more attention to that sooner. No, the Crannogmen, maybe that's why he didn't join Robb, because the Crannogmen don't really have troops. They're just frog people in a swamp, y'all. So yeah, maybe that's the answer. Let's see here. What if Steffan Baratheon had not drowned is kind of an interesting one. That forces Robert to become Lord of Storm's End a little early. Steffan was one conspiring with Ned's dad, Rickard Stark. Stannis is not nearly so traumatized. I don't know if I'd be able to play that whole one out in real quickly. Let's see here. Patchface would just be a really talented fool. Yeah, they would have the most talented fool in Westeros. Thank you, Mold Culture. If Aeron hadn't drowned, then he never would have had his spiritual rebirth. What if Robert had given Storm's End to Stannis? So that's what I was saying earlier. Like, Robert, if he had stayed tighter with Stannis, then maybe Stannis would have gone to Robert when he figured out the Lannister treachery. Yeah, so that's what we're talking about, Haldir, exactly. Like, the Baratheon brothers never worked together very well. And if they had worked together better, they could have resisted the Lannisters' attempts to undermine them, basically, is the short answer. What if Davos had drowned? That is a good one that I wanted to get to. So if Davos had drowned, then he never would have convinced Stannis to go north. And so Stannis is on Dragonstone with a small force, and really with the wrath of King's Landing coming to him. Eventually, King's Landing would have stormed Dragonstone and thrown him out, probably. Like, going north was almost his only choice, and that door was opened by Davos. So that was a huge sliding doors moment. What if Ned didn't get to the Tower of Joy in time, and Baby Jon was left with Arthur Dayne, maybe flees in exile to Essos? I can't answer that question because we don't know what Arthur Dayne's commands were and who was even in charge at the Tower of Joy. Because Arthur Dayne and Oswell Went were Rhaegar buddies who are in on Rhaegar's agenda, whereas Gerald Hightower is coming to the Tower of Joy from King's Landing to send Rhaegar back on behalf of Aerys. So Gerald Hightower has a different potentially motivation than Arthur Dayne. So if Ned hadn't, like, they were just there guarding the tower. They weren't going anywhere. So I don't know what their plan was, to just stay there forever, then die honorably, or if at some point they would have, after Lyanna gave birth, if they would have moved somewhere with Jon. That is just a huge question that we're all waiting to find out, what Rhaegar's plan was for the Tower of Joy and what the Kingsguard's plans were. Cool. Well, that is 2 hours, guys. I think my brain is fried with what ifs. It is a little bit of a challenge for me. I naturally do not do hypotheticals, like just in real life. It's for mental clarity or whatever. Like, I just can't handle them. It's too much for me. This has been a fun discussion with some of these ice and fire sliding doors moments. But yeah, I think I'm going to go get some food, take care of my birds, and watch the Thunder game. Hopefully the Thunder will lose because we hate floppers. In any case, oh, that's right, I said it. Love y'all. And again, I am going to get back to my First Man video, which will be coming out this week. So check it out because it's going to be an hour and 47 minutes of First Man history. And I have lovingly crafted it over the past month or so while my regular video editor has been working on all my other videos. So we've been teaming up, and he's been working on Dothraki Part 2, which is coming out the week after, and then I'll probably have the Winterfell video coming. So I'm going to try to release some big world-building Ice and Fire hardcore content, basically, before House of the Dragon, just so you guys know that I love you, you Ice and Fire hardcores. Most of my crowd leans towards the books. So yeah, I like the shows and the books, so I'm happy to cover both. But I do want to keep you guys fed, so I will be doing that. And thank you all. Thanks for all the emojis in the chat. And I know you'll all love world building videos. That's what people like. All my best videos are world building videos pretty much. So don't worry. I know where the bread is buttered. And I'll see you this week with that First Man video. So please do check it out. Were there any other things I was supposed to say? Oh yeah, Tim, make sure you check out Tim's video tomorrow. And again, Stella Graves has a new one on her channel as well. So thanks to my guest Cameron, and I will see y'all later.